Sheikh Jamal Al-Omri stood at the top of the new luxury tower that overlooked the city, his gaze slowly sweeping across the skyline of his new shopping center in the heart of Dubai. The dazzling modern buildings, sparkling in the sunlight, shone like precious stones, embodying the grandeur and splendor of this metropolis. The wind brought a light aroma of the sea, mixed with the smells of gasoline and perfume, which always filled the air of the city. Jamal was truly pleased. Against the backdrop of giant glass facades and graceful architectural lines, his face reflected the satisfaction of a master proud of his creation. This was not just a shopping center, it was his empire. He was an incredibly wealthy man whose fortune was only part of his power. Royal descent elevated him from birth, but Jamal did not rely on inheritance. He was a politician, a merchant, the mayor of Dubai, a large landowner, and an influential man who knew how to run this dynamic city. For many, he became a symbol of success and unyielding will, a man who was not afraid to take risks for the sake of even greater influence and prosperity. He had resources at his disposal that could provide life for hundreds of people, but Jamal strived for more. This large man, whose facial features seemed carved from harsh rock with a chisel, always attracted attention. His loud, metallic laugh echoed through the vast halls of his palaces like thunder in the desert. Each of his appearances was an event. Tall, stocky, with a muscular figure, he always knew how to make a statement. At 30 years old, the sheikh looked as if his body was created from a rough and strong material that stretched, taking shape with each new victory and success in life. At an imposing height of 6 feet 1 inch, he seemed to tower over his surroundings, the way Dubai itself towered over the desert. The stern features of his face only emphasized his indomitable spirit. People watching him could not remain indifferent. Some, seeing this majestic image, bowed their heads respectfully, considering it the personification of power and luxury, while others saw in it nothing more than an impudent hooligan who knew no boundaries. Jamal seemed to know what they were thinking about him, but paid little attention to such comments. The only thing that really irritated him were the accusations of greed. For him, wealth and power were not an end in themselves, they were means to support his passions. Sheikh Jamal openly called himself an addict, but his addiction did not concern ordinary weaknesses. Absolute power was his true passion. He sought to control everything around him so that there would not be a single corner of his world that did not depend on him. The countless money that flowed to him like a river only fueled this restless appetite. The royal women who surrounded him were not just decorations, they enhanced his image as an undisputed leader and conqueror. Every aspect of his life was imbued with the idea of greatness and superiority, and he could not allow himself to loosen his grip for a moment. This man lived to conquer, and his new creation, the shopping center, was another victory on his long path to absolute dominance. From the window of his luxury Hummer SUV, Sheikh Jamal Al-Omri lazily but vigilantly watched the scene unfolding on the threshold of his new shopping center. He found pleasure even in such little things, turning them into an invisible extension of his control over the city. His attentive gaze instantly caught sight of a group of people. 3 Indian women in bright saris were slowly emerging from the center, pushing shopping carts covered with packages in front of them. Their every movement was smooth, and their gait was confident, despite the weight of their load. They did not look like tourists or casual shoppers, rather, their image exuded inner strength and sensuality, which even simple outfits could not hide. Walking with them was a young Indian man, clearly unconcerned with the ladies or their purchases. His eyes were half closed, his gaze absent, as if he was always on the edge between sleep and reality. He was indifferent to the world around him, to the carts, and even to the women nearby. This strange indifference only intensified his helpless appearance. Sheikh Jamal frowned, and then an evil, predatory smile distorted his lips. He recognized this guy immediately. This Indian was none other than a new investor, naive and unintelligent, according to Jamal. In his eyes, the guy looked like a typical fool, a naive newcomer to the world of big money and strict rules. An investor who could easily be fooled, manipulated in his own interests. But what attracted the sheikh most of all was not his financial capabilities. His main goal was 3 women. It was they who aroused in him a hidden but obvious lust. The women, dressed in simple Indian saris, did not belong to the category of model beauties that Jamal was used to seeing at his luxurious receptions or meeting in elite circles. These were not Bollywood stars with their unapproachable looks and glossy beauty. No, these women belonged to a different type, more real, accessible, and down-to-earth, but no less attractive. Their dark, full of life faces and bodies, their natural feminine attractiveness seemed to attract Jamal. They were those neighborhood beauties who never came into view, but they were the ones who attracted him with their pure and naked sexuality. When the women finally got into the taxi, the sheikh made a decision. His fingers touched the phone lightly, and he quickly dialed the number. The person on the other end of the line answered was a local judge, a man who had long been part of Jamal's network of influence. "I need a formal notice addressed to Ravi and an unknown woman," he dictated in an icy voice, "on charges of growing illegal substances. But make sure nothing is recorded in the protocols." "Okay, Prince, but without submitting official documents." The judge's voice trembled slightly with nervousness, as if he was not sure if he was doing the right thing, trying to at least argue a little. He understood who he was talking to and knew that he was taking a risk, but he still dared to make a weak protest. "I mean, it might be a little illegal," he added, choosing his words carefully, trying not to anger the powerful sheikh. The reaction on the other end of the line was not long in coming. Sheikh Jamal's voice, which usually sounded with that icy confidence inherent in a man accustomed to command, suddenly exploded into a rude cry. He had long tolerated no objections, and this petty official dared to cast a shadow of doubt on his orders. "Won't it be illegal, you say? What do you think would be legal if I ordered a new hole drilled in your ass, you fucking son of a moron?" Jamal growled into the phone, his voice filled not only with rage, but also with contempt. He literally spat out every word, raining them down on the frightened judge like blows of a whip. His loud, hoarse scream echoed throughout the Hummer's interior, adding to the impression of his imminent threat. Every word of Jamal hit the mark, destroying any remnants of resistance in the interlocutor. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. The judge was silent for several seconds, trying to figure out how best to get out of the situation, until his voice wavered again, this time in obvious fear and submission. "I'm sorry, Your Highness. I didn't mean to offend you," he muttered with obvious embarrassment, realizing that he had made a huge mistake. "Please forgive me. Give me some time, and I will see how I can do this for my prince. I will find a way." His tone was desperate, almost pleading. He knew that he was standing on the edge of an abyss, and that one wrong step could lead to disaster for his career and perhaps even for his life. But Jamal was no longer interested in his obedience. He was too furious and too accustomed to the fact that everyone had to carry out his orders unquestioningly and immediately. The judge's response only increased his contempt. His voice became icy again, but still harsh, almost murderous. "You're already fired, asshole," he said with cold finality, not even bothering to hide his complete control over the situation. "Tomorrow you will be replaced by a new judge, and don't even think about complaining or challenging it. You better start looking for a new job now." With these words, the sheikh abruptly ended the call, not wanting to waste another second of his time on the person who dared to doubt his orders. He licked his lips as if anticipating the events to come and turned his gaze to the taxi in which the three women had disappeared. His eyes sparkled now everything was under his control. The victims he has already outlined will not be able to escape his all-seeing gaze. Following the taxi, Sheikh Jamal felt a new wave of adrenaline rush. There were no obstacles in his world that he could not remove with one call or threat. Every detail, every action was calculated, and not a single mistake could go unpunished. In a week, Kalpana froze in shock, as if an iceberg had fallen on her out of nowhere. She felt lightning run through her veins and time slowed down, as did her heartbeat. She stood there, stunned, a tear rolling down her cheek and her hands unconsciously flying to her chest. 36C. Her mind was always picturing the D-Day scenario. "I can't allow this. I'll lose everything. Ravi will be hanged, My daughter will be his young widow. This house and every penny we own will be confiscated, and I will end up on the streets with two little daughters in this foreign land." Kalpana had no sympathy left for her crying son-in-law Ravi, but was left with intense rage at his carelessness. His one fatal mistake, and their lives and fates were in jeopardy. Ravi, her son-in-law, invested the entire family fortune in acquiring this land and farmhouse on the outskirts of Dubai. Kalpana's entire savings, the money received from the sale of the family house in Chennai, and even the family jewels were all invested in this damn venture. The final sound in her coffin was when she got India to acquire land in her name. How could you be so naive, Ravi? How could you never discover that these farmers grow prohibited plants on our land? Kalpana shouted at Ravi, who was now literally crying, and his tears were falling due to the official notice from the local mayor. "Don't worry, old lady," Ravi retorted and impatiently searched the drawers for his passport. "I will go to India and find connections there to fix this." "What?" Kalpana asked furiously this time, watching him stuff the rags into the shoulder thread. "What the hell are you doing, Ravi? Where the hell are you running now?" "I must run, otherwise I will be hanged." Grabbing his bag and passport, the fearless Ravi ran away from home like a duck, without even saying goodbye to his young wife Pallavi. Upstairs in her bedroom, Pallavi heard the loud sound of a door slamming and something falling to the ground. She rushed down the stairs and found her mother lying unconscious on the floor, and her husband had left and apparently would never return. Kalpana, a 43-year-old Indian widow, arrived in the UAE just a month ago with her two daughters. Pallavi, the eldest daughter, was married to Ravi for 2 years, and the youngest, Ramya, although of age, was still not married. Ravi moved here a year ago when he was offered a job in Dubai. He was never a hard-working professional and was always looking for the shortest route to a gold mine. In this search, he discovered the idea of growing a cherry crop. A local broker who had previously worked for Sheikh Jamal guided and assisted him in this venture. Mohan was promised a much higher and faster return on investment. Having no experience in farming, the careless one invested all his money and even forced his mother-in-law to sell her family home there in India in order to afford this farmland and a luxurious farmhouse in an oasis. Kalpana resisted the idea, but under pressure from Pallavi, she agreed, hoping that the family would stay together and Ravi could provide a better life for them all. In a way, Kalpana was also tired of her job as a primary school teacher, who always earned the family's bread and butter. Ravi was too naive and fell into the trap of a local agent who provided him with all the labor to harvest the crops. Contract labor cultivated an identical appearance of prohibited plants, and Ravi had no idea about it until he was given the official notice. "The prince will be here in a few minutes, wait lady," an intelligent female voice told Kalpana over the phone. After Ravi left, both Kalpana and Pallavi fanatically tried to approach the relevant authorities to clarify their case. Both the magistrate and the council advised them to consult Prince Jamal bin Omari. Finally, after 3 days of effort, they managed to contact this mysterious man. "Good afternoon, Prince Jamal." Kalpana's voice trembled when she heard a rough, hoarse voice on the other end of the line. She knew that this conversation could decide the fate of her family. "I am Kalpana Yair, sir, and I need your precious time to discuss the legal notice that the magistrate has served on me." The Sheikh's response was immediate and his tone was full of malice. "Oh, so you're the one who was caught producing prohibited substances, right?" Jamal barked with caustic contempt. "Why aren't you in jail yet, huh?" Kalpana trembled, fear gripped her body, and tears welled up in her eyes. She gasped in horror, realizing that her whole life and reputation were in danger. "No, sir, no, this is a mistake." Her voice trembled. She could hardly restrain herself from sobbing. "We are not to blame for anything. We don't even know what harvest we're talking about. Someone set us up." Sheikh Jamal continued to press with predatory pleasure, his words tearing her apart. "And why do you think someone decided to set you up? Because you're so damn attractive that everyone wants to see you in their bed?" he asked sarcastically. Kalpana blushed with humiliation, Her heart sank at this shameless phrase. Sorry, sir, she felt humiliated to the core, but could not allow herself to show weakness. There is clearly some kind of misunderstanding here. We have nothing to do with these allegations. The Sheikh's anger flared up brighter, and his cry pierced her like the blow of a whip. Shut up, bitch, Jamal roared. There is no misunderstanding. You are a hot woman, and your daughters are even more beautiful. We caught you red-handed, and we have the proof. These words pierced her like an icy knife, and Kalpana shuddered from the cold fear that paralyzed her. She trembled, trying to collect her thoughts. Please, sir, my daughters are not guilty of anything. Leave them alone. I swear we didn't commit any crime. Her voice was weak, as if she had been broken. But Jamal just laughed. His laugh was cold and merciless, as if he enjoyed playing with her fears. Ha ha ha, you're wasting my time, bitch. It's better to spend these moments thinking about why you're not in prison yet. Tears of despair were already rolling down her cheeks when the realization of her helplessness covered her like a freezing wind. A prison sentence seemed inevitable. Sir, please, I'm just a school teacher. Check it out. We have become victims of a conspiracy, I beg you. Jamal paused for a moment, as if considering her words, but his next response was even more vile and cynical. Stop talking nonsense. His voice now sounded almost playful, as if this was just a game for him. The only thing keeping you out of jail is your curvy body. Her breath froze as those words hit her. His brazenness and audacity were overwhelming, and Kalpana felt that she was losing her ability to resist. But soon the fire of anger flared up inside her. Her fear began to turn into rage. You can't blackmail me, no matter who you are, she challenged him. Her voice trembled, but with every word she felt more and more strength. I will fight in court to prove my innocence. Jamal chuckled, his voice filled with contempt. Great idea, his tone became playful again, but with a hint of threat. In the meantime, I will happily spend time with your beautiful daughters. They will soon forget about you, immersed in their rapturous pleasure. These words were like a blow to her soul. Her fear for her daughters flared up with renewed vigor. She tightened her grip on the phone as if it would help her protect them. Don't you dare say their names with your dirty tongue, you bastard, she screamed, sobbing with horror and rage. But Jamal was relentless. Enough, bitch. His voice became even louder and harsher. One more word and I'll do it right in front of you. You leave me no choice. Kalpana realized that every word she said only made the situation worse. She tried to change tactics, hoping for at least some humanity in this monster. Sir, we are innocent, I beg you. Please tell me what can I do to save my family. Her voice became softer, almost pleading. She knew that any word she said would now have consequences. Jamal paused before answering with cool confidence. Good question, he said, as if deciding how far to go. You obey me, and then your family will not be in danger. Kalpana froze for a moment, realizing that he was just starting the game. Submit? She asked again, incredulously. Jamal chuckled. Total submission of your body and your love, he answered in a cruel, icy tone. Her hands clenched into fists, anger overtaking her again. You bastard! Her voice trembled with rage. You can use me, but I will never give you what you want. Jamal just chuckled. Ha ha ha. Oh, what a stupid bitch you are. Can't you see? It's all about your juicy body. I need your body, but I won't take you by force. You yourself will ask me about it. Kalpana froze, realizing that he was trying to break her pride and will. But there was still a remnant of strength inside her, and she was not going to give up. In your dreams, she spat, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her. You won't get anything from me that I won't give myself. Jamal, however, only laughed in response. You will do whatever I order, and you will ask for it yourself. In the meantime, prepare dinner for me. Tonight, I want you to meet me at your home and dress as I say. Kalpana was choking with humiliation and fear. What? Dinner at my place? Please no. Enough, bitch, Jamal roared again. One more objection, and the deal is cancelled. Do you understand everything? Yes, sir. Her voice was as quiet as a whisper. At 7:45 in the evening, Kalpana stood in front of the bedroom mirror, straightening her hair and dress. Her hands were shaking with tension. Her heart was beating faster than usual. She was not used to such outfits, but today she was wearing a dress that was sent to her by order of the sheikh. The black cocktail dress with a deep neckline, brought by the courier boy, seemed to frighten her with its frankness. Her eldest daughter, Pallavi, whispered curiously that it looked bold and sexy, but there was no condemnation in her daughter's words, only surprise. Kalpana knew that she did not wear this dress of her own free will. It was part of the deal with Jamal, a topic she could hardly stomach, but she had no choice. The afternoon and evening passed in frantic preparations for the dinner party. Kalpana exhausted herself preparing a 12-course South Indian meal, each requiring time and skill. The kitchen smelled of spices, and each dish reflected her skill as a hostess and desire to please the uninvited guest, so that this nightmare would end as soon as possible. The only consolation for Kalpana was that her daughters, Pallavi and Ramya, without asking any questions, agreed to spend the night with relatives. Their absence eased her suffering and allowed her to focus on what was about to happen. When Kalpana finally put on the dress, she was overcome with shame. It seemed too bold for her, too revealing. Black, shiny fabric wrapped around her figure, emphasizing every line of her body. The thin straps barely stayed on her shoulders, and the deep neckline openly exposed her breasts, which were perfectly rounded under the fabric. The dress hugged her slender hips and long legs, reaching to her mid-calf. She felt vulnerable and exposed, as if her body was on display. Even the underwear she had to wear a thong left almost no marks under the thin fabric, emphasizing the smooth curves of her body. Finishing her look, she slipped on a pair of sky-high pencil heels that made her look almost 6 feet tall. Now she looked like a luxurious model on the catwalk, although inside she was consumed with anxiety. It was a June night, the air was warm and humid, and the full moon reigned in the sky, filling everything around with a cold silver light. The farmhouse, surrounded by palm trees and gardens, seemed strangely removed from reality. A light breeze rustled the leaves, creating a quiet but tense atmosphere. The hum of an engine was heard in the distance, and soon Sheikh Jamal drove out in his bulky Hummer, illuminating the road with powerful headlights. The car stopped in front of the house, and Jamal slowly got out, casting a piercing gaze at the woman who was waiting for him on the threshold. When his eyes met Kalpana's face, at first he was stunned. The moonlight fell on her face, giving it a mysterious silver glow, and Jamal could not look away. She was like a living moon, shining with its dull, sad beauty, which was striking in its fragility. Her dark, jet-black hair fell in waves over her shoulders, highlighting the contrast with her shiny dress. Light makeup only enhanced her natural beauty. Thick, velvety eyelashes framed her deep, mysterious eyes, and her full lips barely noticeable trembled from nervous tension. Kalpana tried not to look at him for too long, as if his gaze was like the sun, which burns if you linger on it for even a moment. Yet she felt his presence even when she turned away. His eyes, deep and unblinking, were devoid of emotion, like the eyes of a predator who could watch the torment of his prey without a single movement of his soul. These were the eyes of a man who could enjoy the pain of others, and the thought took her breath away. They seemed to swallow her, exploring every inch of her body, revealing her most secret thoughts. She made a weak attempt to smile, but it looked more like a mask. The dress fit her perfectly, hugging her toned figure, revealing a smooth, creamy cleavage that certainly did not go unnoticed by the sheikh. Her thin arms trembled slightly, but she stood straight, not allowing her inner fears to come out. Long, slender legs were visible through the slit of the dress, and every detail of her appearance emphasized her sophistication and attractiveness. Jamal, coming closer, could not help but admire her figure, her wasp waist, thin hips, rounded breasts, which were so perfect that it seemed that it could be compared to the full moon in the sky. But the closer he got, the clearer it became to him that her beauty was frightening. It was the beauty of a forest fire, something powerful, wild, and dangerous. Her dark oval face expressed a hidden vulnerability that Jamal could not help but notice. Her lips, sensual and full, trembled, betraying her inner struggle. He was fascinated by her figure, slender, like a dancer, with natural grace in every movement. When their eyes met, Kalpana felt his cold, empty eyes as if stripping her to her very soul. These were the eyes of a person who was alien to compassion and humanity, and this made her truly afraid. She couldn't stand this look and quickly lowered her eyes, holding back her trembling. After a tense silence, Sheikh Jamal took a step closer, and Kalpana felt his presence as if the ground itself had shifted beneath her. She could not look into his eyes, but she felt that they were watching her every move, like a hunter waiting for the right moment to attack. "You have prepared well." His voice was deep, with a hint of mockery, and the vibration of this voice seemed to be something beyond her control. He looked around the room where the table was set with South Indian dishes, the aromas of spices filling the air. "Thank you, sir," Kalpana whispered barely audibly, trying to keep her voice from trembling, but desperate fear betrayed her. Everything inside was compressed from tension. Her body, covered in a tight dress, seemed on the verge of bursting. The sheikh approached the table, keeping his eyes on Kalpana, and raised his glass of wine, carefully studying its contents, as if it were a scene from a carefully planned performance. She knew that she should sit at the table with him, but her feet seemed rooted to the floor. The room seemed suddenly to feel crowded, as if the air was thickening with the intense energy between them. "Sit down." His voice was firm, like a command, and Kalpana limply obeyed, sinking into the chair opposite him. The man began to slowly taste the food without taking his eyes off it, as if testing not only the food, but also its internal stability. Kalpana sat as if on pins and needles, her hands found no place, her heart was beating wildly in her chest. She couldn't concentrate, her thoughts were confused, but the main thing was fear of the inevitable. "You know that this night will determine everything." The sheikh's voice cut through the silence. "You understand why I'm here and what I expect from you." Kalpana froze, realizing that this moment had arrived. It was not just a dinner, it was a test of her will, her pride, her dignity. But something stirred inside her, like a wave hidden deep beneath the surface. The fear gradually began to recede, being replaced by something else, something dark and inexplicable. His power, his confidence, his audacity, all this began to strangely attract her, like a magnetic field. "I know what you want," she finally whispered, her voice weak, but with a hint of defiance. "And are you ready to give it to me?" The sheikh leaned forward, his gaze was heavy, piercing. Kalpana could not find words to respond. Two contradictory feelings fought inside her: humiliation and strange excitement. Her body resisted, but something deep inside was awakening. She felt her breathing quicken, her hands became wet, and her gaze gradually rose to his face, in which the confidence of a winner was read. "Yes," she blurted out, and at that moment she could no longer stop herself. The sheikh stood up and slowly approached her. His every movement was clear and thoughtful. He extended his hand, forcing her to stand up. Kalpana did this automatically, not realizing that her body no longer belonged to her. "You belong to me tonight," he whispered, and his hot breath touched her neck. She could not resist, could not fight the feeling that was rolling over her in waves. Everything inside was burning with shame, but at the same time, this feeling awakened something else in her, something forbidden and desirable. "I'll give you everything you want," she whispered barely audibly, realizing that now there was no turning back. Sheikh Jamal did not say another word. He led her to the bedroom, and the night seemed to swallow her completely. Kalpana felt her inner walls crumbling, and what began as fear and humiliation turned into mad desire. A desire she had never felt before made her forget everything except this moment. She submitted to her feelings, allowing herself to feel freedom for the first time, albeit in such a perverted form. And although she would wake up in the morning with a bitter taste on her lips, that night Kalpana stopped struggling. She submitted to her desires, completely surrendering to the sheikh, realizing that this was the price for her family and her future. The next morning, Kalpana woke up early. Her body was stiff, and the faint, bitter smell of the previous night filled the room. She slowly rose from the bed, feeling her head getting heavier from the events. Her inner world was in chaos. She tried to restore calm, but the feeling of humiliation mixed with an inexplicable feeling of liberation tore her soul apart. Looking around, Kalpana noticed that Sheikh Jamal had disappeared. The room was empty. Only abandoned glasses of wine and rumpled sheets were reminders of the night's events. Walking out into the hallway, she heard someone fiddling around in the kitchen. Is the sheikh still here? But when she quietly came closer, she saw her eldest daughter, Pallavi, standing quietly at the window and looking at the rising sun. "Mom," Pallavi said in a soft but tense voice without turning around. "You didn't have to do this." Kalpana froze, realizing that her daughter knew everything that had happened. A dull lump rose in her throat, and she could not hold back her tears. She understood that her sacrifice did not go unnoticed, but something in her daughter's words struck her. Not condemnation, but sympathy, as if Pallavi had long known about the world in which they lived and the cruelty they had to face. "I did this for you," Kalpana said, barely audible, her voice breaking with shame and pain. "We had no choice." "He won't stop," Pallavi continued, finally turning to her mother. Her eyes were full of pain, but there was no reproach in them. "You think it will all end here, but he will continue. You understand that, right?" Kalpana nodded slowly. She understood that Sheikh Jamal was like a poisonous snake from which there was no escape, and that his influence on their lives had only just begun. But what could she do now? Her family was under threat, and with every new step this man could completely destroy their lives. Meanwhile, Jamal returned to his tower. He was pleased. This was not the first such encounter, and he was already accustomed to the fact that women sooner or later surrendered to his authority. For him, it was just part of his strategy, to humiliate, conquer, and destroy. But Kalpana was special. Something in her look the night before had awakened a strange feeling in him, not only lust, but also a strange respect for her tenacity. This irritated him. "Did you do what I asked?" He asked his advisor as soon as he entered his office. The advisor nodded. "Yes, Your Highness. The Earth is now completely at your disposal. There is no need to disturb the Ayer family anymore." Jamal thought about it. He now had complete control over their destinies, and although this brought him satisfaction, he began to feel a strange desire to make the game more difficult. He was used to power, but suddenly something else appeared in his thoughts. Something that was not only about money and influence, but about personal victory over people who, despite their position, did not completely break. Meanwhile, Kalpana, realizing the magnitude of her actions, began making plans. She could no longer allow Jamal to control her and her family, but for this, she needed allies. Her youngest daughter, Ramia, had connections with the Indian embassy, and Pallavi had friends among local activists who could help expose the Sheikh's dark deeds. Kalpana didn't know where this would lead, but now she was ready to fight. Jamal's shadow continued to loom over them, but they were no longer going to live in fear. She knew that her life would never be the same, but this time she would not give up without a fight. Sheikh Jamal did not yet know that his sacrifice was ready to go to the end, and that her love for her daughters would turn her into a person with whom he would still have to reckon. Sheikh Jamal al-Omri sat in his office at the top of the tower, watching the sunset bathe Dubai in golden hues. It seemed that this day was no different from the previous ones, but his thoughts persistently returned to the woman he saw that evening. He did not understand why this meeting left such a deep mark on his soul. He met many women, won them, and threw them away when he got tired of them. But Kalpana was different. Her gaze a mixture of fear, pain, and will did not give him peace. The sheikh tried to drive away thoughts of her, but her image was firmly entrenched in his mind. She broke under his pressure, just like everyone else, but something about her stoic demeanor awakened in him not only desire, but respect. It was a strange feeling for Jamal, who was used to ruling over everyone and experiencing nothing but satisfaction from his absolute power. A week had passed since that fateful night when Kalpana agreed to his terms, and during this time he had not received any news from her. He was sure that she would not dare to take further action against him who would dare to challenge the Sheikh of Dubai. But her silence became unbearable for him. He needed to know how she felt now. It wasn't just curiosity. Something deeper was pushing him to take this step. He took the phone and dialed her number, which was already recorded in his contacts. The phone rang several times before Kalpana's quiet, trembling voice was heard on the other end. "Hello," her voice sounded uncertain, as if she didn't expect him to ever contact her again. Jamal paused for a moment before answering. A strange excitement came over him, as if he himself had not expected that it would be so difficult for him to speak. "Kalpana," his voice was low and calm, but there was some kind of internal struggle in it. "We need to talk." There was silence on the other end. Kalpana did not immediately understand what was happening. He called her again. Why? Her heart began to beat faster as memories of that night washed over her. She tried to forget about it, to convince herself that it was just a means to survive. But now, hearing his voice, she felt something that made her stop. "What should we talk about, Sheikh?" she asked, trying to hide her excitement. Her voice sounded firmer than she actually felt. Jamal did not answer immediately. He suddenly realized that he did not know how to explain his thoughts. All his life, he was accustomed to the fact that everyone around him obeyed him without question. But now he felt on the verge of something new, something that required him to be vulnerable, for which he was not ready. "I want to see you," he finally said, clearly hearing his own words weigh heavily on him. "Today, in my tower." Kalpana froze, her hands clenching on the telephone receiver. She didn't know what to think. Thoughts swirled in her head. What does he want from her now? But instead of fear, she felt a strange warmth that slowly spread throughout her body. Maybe it was fatigue from constant fear, or maybe it was something deeper. "Okay," she answered quietly, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll come." When Kalpana entered Jamal's tower, she felt a strange mixture of emotions overcome her. The luxurious interiors, shining marble floors, and height of the building still impressed her, but her thoughts were completely absorbed by the man who was waiting for her at the top. Her soul was torn by contradictions. An inner voice screamed that she should not have come here, but something inside her still forced her to take this step. When the elevator door opened, Jamal stood in front of her. He stood at the window, looking out over Dubai, his figure powerful as always. But something changed in his face. It was tense, as if he, too, felt unsure of what was about to happen. "I thought you wouldn't come," he said without turning his head. Kalpana took a few steps forward, her heels barely audible on the floor. She stopped a few meters away from him, feeling the tension building inside her. "You called me yourself," she answered, her voice quiet but confident. Jamal finally turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. At that moment, he realized that he felt more than just desire for her. It was something more, a deep attraction that he couldn't ignore. Kalpana was a woman he couldn't just use and forget. In her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own emotions, fear, pain, but also a strange mutual understanding. "I don't know what you did to me, Kalpana," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "But I can't get you out of my head." Kalpana stood motionless, her heart skipping a beat with every word he said. She did not expect such confessions. She knew that he was a cruel man who was used to getting his way at any cost. But now it was not a powerful ruler who stood before her, but a man who for the first time showed her his vulnerability. "You broke me," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "But somehow I'm still here." Jamal came closer. His eyes were filled with the same feelings as hers. For the first time in his life, he felt that in front of him was a person who could understand him, despite all his cruelty and power. "Maybe because you see something in me that no one else sees," he said quietly, placing his hand on her shoulder. His touch was soft, but the power he possessed was felt in it. Kalpana looked at him, and a tear flickered in her eyes. She didn't know how it happened, but at that moment she realized that she couldn't hate him as much as she thought. Yes, he was the man who ruined her life, but he was also the one who brought out something new in her, a power she didn't have before. "I don't know what to do with this," she whispered, feeling her emotions overcome her. Jamal gently touched her face, wiping a tear from her cheek. His gaze was full of warmth and tenderness, which he had hidden for so long. "I don't know either," he admitted, his voice almost silent. "But I want to try. Try to be with you." Kalpana was stunned by these words. Everything she knew about Jamal was crumbling in her mind. He was not only a cruel and domineering ruler, but also a man who now stood before her with an open heart. And although her mind screamed that this was wrong, her heart had already made a decision. She looked into his eyes and said quietly, "Let's try." Jamal squeezed her hand, and at that moment something new arose between them, something that could not be destroyed by either money or power. It was not just a desire, but a love that arose among the ruins of their past lives. Kalpana knew that coming out to her daughters would be one of the most difficult moments of her life. She knew that the decision she made to be with Sheikh Jamal would change everything. Her fears and doubts only intensified as she imagined how her daughters, Pallavi and Ramya, would take the news. When she finally pulled herself together and told her daughters about her feelings for Jamal, an oppressive silence reigned in the room. Pallavi and Ramya sat opposite her, as if they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Pallavi, the eldest daughter, was the first to break the silence. Her eyes flashed with indignation, but her voice sounded restrained, almost cold. "Mom, have you fallen in love with the man who ruined our lives?" Her words sounded like a shot. "This man blackmailed you, made you suffer, and now you want to be with him." Kalpana lowered her eyes, feeling her heart squeezing in pain. She understood that it was impossible to explain this decision logically. Her love for Jamal did not fit into the framework of common sense, and oddly enough, she herself tried to comprehend how this happened. But now she needed to be honest with her daughters. "I can't explain it in a way that you will understand," she said softly, trying to remain calm. "I myself struggled with these feelings for a long time, but there is something about him, something that attracts me. He showed me his vulnerability, and I saw in him not only a tyrant." "Vulnerability." Pallavi interrupted her, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is the man who threatened to destroy our family and pushed you to the limit. How can you talk about him with such tenderness?" Tears welled up in Kalpana's eyes, but she remained firm. She knew that Pallavi was telling the truth, but something inside her pulled her to Jamal, no matter how hard she tried to resist. Ramya, the youngest daughter, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. Her voice was quieter, but there was deep confusion in it. "Mom, I understand that you love him. But how is this possible after everything he did?" Her words were full of pain. "Do you really think he has changed? That he will be different now?" Kalpana sighed, feeling her heart torn between her love for her daughters and her feelings for Jamal. She knew that her daughters would not be able to immediately accept her choice, and that was fair. "I don't know if he will change," she answered honestly, looking at Ramya. "But I want to try, and I ask you to support me, at least give me a chance." Pallavi jumped up from her seat, her eyes sparkling with anger. "Are you asking us to support you when you are essentially betraying our family for this monster?" Her voice broke into a scream. "I can't understand you, Mom. I can't support this nonsense." Ramya was silent. Her eyes were full of tears, but she did not condemn her mother as harshly as Pallavi. "Mom," she said quietly, "I just want you to be happy. But I'm afraid he'll hurt you again. I can't look at this." Kalpana tried to approach her daughters, but Pallavi stepped back as if she did not want her mother to touch her. It broke Kalpana's heart, but she knew it would take a long time for her children to even try to understand her choice. "I will never betray you," she said quietly, holding back tears. "You are the most important thing in my life, and I will never put Jamal above you. But please understand, he has changed for me, and I must follow my feelings." Pallavi shook her head, her face showing disappointment and anger. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this," she said coldly before leaving the room, leaving her mother and little sister alone. Ramya stayed. Her eyes were full of pain and doubt, but unlike Pallavi, she did not turn away. "I want to believe that you are making the right choice, Mom," she said quietly, "but I'm scared. You deserve to be happy, but be careful, please." Kalpana hugged Ramya, feeling tears rolling down her cheeks. She knew that her daughters could not immediately accept her decision, but their love and care were still strong. This gave her hope that they would be able to understand her, even if not right away. When Ramia left after Pallavi, Kalpana was left alone in the room, lost in thought. She knew that a difficult path lay ahead of her, but now that she had made a choice, she would have to fight for her feelings and for her family. And although her daughters were now against her decision, she believed that over time they would be able to understand her choice. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next